This is part 2 about China, especially India-China relationship, and that too, not a general broad everything about India-China relationship. I intend to spend a few minutes on India-China relationship in the context of defense and security issues. That is because I am expecting you to have noticed today that China has once again refused to declare Maulvi Azhar Masood as international terrorist. China has once again used its position as permanent member of Security Council and permanent member with veto powers. China has refused to let Maulvi Azhar Masood be declared as international terrorist. This recent move was in the context of post-Pulwama global response. So when this suicide bomber Adil Ahmed crashed himself into our CRPF convoy on February 14, it was clear that this is Pakistan's work. As is the terrorist methodology, even Jaish Mohammad formally announced and took the responsibility of what happened. And then France moved this resolution at United Nations Security Council. This time there were some reasons to probably hope that China may not back Maulvi Azhar Masood personally and especially Pakistan. But as is the method of UNSC functioning, the member country has to propose a resolution that is circulated among 5 permanent members and 10 temporary members. If they want to raise any objection on that, some time limit is given. Under Indian Standard Time, what China did last night, that happens to be the daytime of UN headquarters, New York. So over here we get the news around 12:30 p.m. And personally I was waiting to find out what happens. So at the risk of repetition I am stating that I was keenly watching this because I knew that there were some chances that probably China may not back Maulvi Azhar Masood and Pakistan this time. But China proved once again that it's not going to change its methods. In fact, it borders viciousness. What China did last night, please remember, is not to use its veto in favor of Pakistan. China came up with some technical reason, and now the meeting wherein the decision about Maulvi Azhar Masood would be taken got postponed by 12 days. I'm calling it vicious because if China wanted to raise any technical ground, China had ample time during last 15 days. China didn't do it. That is Chinese system of doing things. That is a quintessential Chinese methodology of doing things. That China would wait until the last day. Chinese deception practices also are exemplary. So create some kind of vibes that probably this time and on this issue, China may not back Pakistan. And then suddenly at the last moment do something completely unexpected, and it is come up with some technical ground and defer the voting by 12 days. This is practicing procrastination deliberately. when a certain terrorist incident happens, emotions on both sides are pretty high. It's also a principle from Indian school of management, that is thanda karke khao. But China is past master in it. So you even delay it by 12 days. These are very critical 12 days. If either escalation is to happen, which has been happening in fact for last couple of days, post Pulwama and also post Indian Air Force attack at Balakot, the escalation has slowed down in fact. None of the two countries are engaging themselves in saber rattling. So while on the face of it, escalation appears to have slowed down, we actually have reports of Pakistan mobilizing forces on the front. So it means these 12 days, Pakistan gets 12 more days to prepare. Those are the same 12 days when India's election fever will pick up. Within next 12 days, the first notification will have to be there. And filing of nomination papers, allotting of symbols, a reserved time limit for withdrawal of your nomination paper, and when finally the battle lines are drawn. Because first voting is on April 11. Minimum time frame required is 35 days, which would mean by literally the time has already begun, the countdown has already begun. So once election fever catches up, probably government may not have time, the sitting party in government may not have time to pursue all Pakistan matters. Plus, it goes without saying that many international powers are bound to interfere in Indian electoral process. A couple of days ago, Congress MP who originally was an outstanding journalist, Kumar Ketkar, my friend, he went public with the statement that there is an international conspiracy to get Narendra Modi back as Prime Minister. So if someone wants to get Narendra Modi back as Prime Minister, it is a conspiracy. I must tell you as objectively as possible that it's quite possible. There may be many countries who would want to see Narendra Modi back as Prime Minister, because their national interest gets served by having him again as Prime Minister. But make no mistake about it, there are also many similar international conspiracies operational to ensure that Modi doesn't become Prime Minister again. And if one is to prepare an international list, the national list will be a separate issue. One is to prepare an international list of those who do not want to have Narendra Modi back as Prime Minister. China will be at number 1. And China, with its capacities of hacking and cyber patrolling, China is bound to interfere in Indian electoral process the way Russia is supposed to have interfered in the previous presidential election, and that too allegedly Russia is supposed to have interfered in US presidential election in favor of Trump. So what is upcoming is a big battle, but this is a small but important battle in the same direction. China using a technical ground to defer a resolution on Maulvi Azhar Masood by like another 12 days. It's actually a pretty serious move. If Maulvi Azhar Masood is declared as international terrorist, it means Pakistan will have to confiscate all his property. All other countries, including all other like banks and wherever accounts are maintained, Mauritius, Switzerland, Singapore, Hong Kong, Cayman Islands, they will have to cancel and forfeit all accounts of either Maulvi Azhar Masood or his organization Jaish Mohammad or anything that shows links with it. As it is, Pakistan continues to be on the grey list of FATF. So Pakistan is under watch for financing terror. Grey list means Pakistan is under watch. Declaring Azhar Masood as international terrorist also means that anybody has authority to liquidate him. What it means is India can get him killed. The way USA killed Osama bin Laden in the night between May 1st and 2nd in 2011. Declaring Maulvi Azhar Masood as international terrorist will also authorize India to undertake such an action. Not that anything stops India now. International law is in our favor. Last but not least, declaring Azhar Masood as international terrorist would mean that it would become at least difficult, if not impossible, for Pakistan to let Azhar Masood continue his stay on Pakistani soil and continue to organize his activities on Pakistani soil, use Pakistani territory for planning and executing various terrorist activities, because once declared as international terrorist, it becomes Pakistan's responsibility to catch him and bring him to book. If Pakistan doesn't do that, to say the least, it is the failure of Pakistani state, and to say the most, it would mean Pakistan itself is consciously harboring a declared terrorist. That means Pakistan itself becomes eligible to be declared as terrorist state. Personally, I have always been clamoring for India to lobby to get Pakistan declared as international terrorist state. That's the definition under international law. Any state which either consciously sponsors terrorist actions or harbors, it may not consciously sponsor, but it harbors under the garb of so-called non-state actors. If a state allows terrorist activities to go on and harbors, then the state itself becomes eligible to be declared as terrorist state. I have always clamored for this, that India should do its best to move United Nations, including General Assembly and Security Council, to get Pakistan declared as terrorist state. The worst that can happen is something that has already happened. And we know it. We understand international politics and geopolitics, that China is going to back Pakistan to the hilt. On one side, China is utterly crushing Muslims in Xinjiang. There is hardly any true freedom of religion in China. There are over 100 million Chinese Christian people. But every church in China has to pay obeisance to the Communist Party. If it is a Catholic church, normally the orders come from Rome, and the bishops or fathers for a church and archbishops are appointed by Rome. China doesn't agree to that. China says every single bishop or father to be appointed for every church has to be vetted and then allowed by the Chinese Communist Party. It is mandatory for all churches and of course Buddhist monk temples and matha. It is mandatory to display the Chinese flag at the gate. It is also mandatory that Chinese flag should be the highest flying flag for any such institution. Now, Pakistan and Islamic countries don't utter one word about Chinese tyranny in Xinjiang. But Pakistan has China as all-weather friend. And Indian diplomacy should know, and we do know, I know that we do know that China is going to back these are diplomatic moves. I'm waiting for India's response. And actually the real litmus test of India's strength and resolve to stand up to China is not what India does with respect to Pakistan, but it is what India does with respect to China. In the light of what is happening, Doklam is a small issue. Please remember, it's a small issue. And at least over there we did show that India is ready to stand up to China and can successfully see eyeball to eyeball, not budge and not lose patience. It's in fact China that turns panicky and starts fretting and fuming. That's a small incident. This issue about terror is a big issue. A couple of weeks ago, Chinese president had asked the military to be ready for war. These are not the words to be trifled with. Let us please remember that Xi Jinping is the most powerful political leader of China, next only to Mao. That is because under whatever is the constitutional structure of China, there are three topmost posts, within which President of PRC, People's Republic of China, is actually not the highest post. It is rather ornamental. The post more powerful than President PRC is Chairperson CCP, that is Chinese Communist Party. The post of Chairperson CCP is more powerful than President of PRC. And if you don't know, you are going to feel slightly surprised for a moment that the most powerful post under Chinese constitutional arrangement is neither President PRC nor Chairperson CCP. It is Chairperson of the Military Commission. The Military Commission is the highest decision-making body in China. In the history of post-revolution China, the only person so far who had all three posts at one and the same time was Mao Zedong, the maker of modern China, father of the revolution. He is respectfully addressed as chairman in China, and also some people in Bengal and rest of India also address him respectfully as chairman. Mao died in September 1976. Until then, he held all three posts. It was an unwritten and unspoken convention, kind of as a matter of gesture of respect for Mao, that nobody would now man all three posts simultaneously. And the presidents that followed, so Mao was succeeded by Deng Xiaoping. He set China on the path of LPG. And for 30 years, beginning with 1981, China has been growing at a pace of over 10% per annum. GDP growth rate has been over 10% per annum. Back in 1981, India's GDP was more than China's GDP. So it goes without saying that it means India's per capita GDP also was more than Chinese per capita GDP, because Indian population even then was less than Chinese population. But China picked up frantic pace. Now China is world's second largest economy in ERM terms, exchange rate mechanism terms. You start talking of PPP, Chinese economy in terms of size turns out to be equal to US economy. And we are still struggling. we are still struggling with what I call as our leftist hangover. The hangover of socialist policies which pull down India's GDP growth rate. So China has stolen a march over us. China's foreign exchange reserves are bigger than our GDP. Our foreign exchange reserves are barely $400 billion. In the objective sense of the term, we may think it's good, but Chinese forex reserves are over $4 trillion. $4 trillion. China uses that money to get the countries on Chinese side. That is called checkbook diplomacy. So Indian Prime Minister, on becoming Prime Minister, picks up Bhutan as the first country to visit. That was back in 2014. And signs many deals, treaties, etc. The focus is on hydel electricity. Bhutan has a great potential. As much as or slightly more than 1/3 of Bhutan's GDP is from the hydel electricity that India buys from Bhutan. Then the Doklam Tri-Junction issue comes up and India stands up to Doklam. China changes the policy. And with Bhutan, rather than saber rattling, China offers tremendous facilities and funding that Bhutan simply can't reject. That's a plan to create commonality of interests. And we will help you so much that you don't need even. What? Is India going to tell you tomorrow that they will not buy 1/3 hydel electricity from you? Then kind of China says, we'll buy that. Here is help. This is Sun Tzu's Art of War. This book, the classic Art of War, written by ancient Chinese military strategist Sun Tzu, about 5th or 6th century BC. He says that victory is the best victory where enemy finds no need to even fight. For Western strategic thinking, war is an extension of diplomacy. For China, war is the last resort, but have such steps before war. Why would you do that? Here are we to help you. Even with India, China may say we are prepared to invest in railways, your electricity projects, and your best-selling cell phone hardware, computers all come from China. And as a common customer, nobody hardly cares. I want a good product and I want it to give good service. I don't care whether it comes from China or something. But then it's a Chinese footprint in our economy. And once economies are entangled, then everyone knows that it becomes difficult and to the point of even being impossible for those countries to fight. But China continues to act against India's national self-interests. China is the biggest debtor nation, that is creditor nation. US is China's biggest debtor nation. Hillary Clinton, when she was Secretary of State, did make a statement. Her statement, very meaningful one, her statement was, nobody goes to war with your bankers. When Republican politicians in US politics were making noises about taking on China, this is what she said. There is a great element of truth, please remember. It's almost clear that Mohammad bin Salman, the present ruler of Saudi Arabia, at least has a great responsibility in Khashoggi's murder inside the Saudi consulate in Istanbul. But President Trump refuses to take any note of it because Saudi Arabia is now world's largest importer of military hardware. We were at number 1. But in terms of military hardware, India has followed a right policy of reducing dependence on military hardware and try and see that Make in India succeeds and the production of military hardware, arms and ammunition begins over here in India. We want to reduce our dependence. So now Saudi Arabia has overtaken India. As of today, Saudi Arabia is world number 1 in import of military hardware. And that is largely from USA. And the businessman that President Trump is, he is on record having said that I will not forego an order of over $100 billion for one Khashoggi. That is a single order by Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia was purchasing military hardware worth more than $100 billion. And then President Trump went on to say it means these many jobs for American youngsters, etc., etc. I care two hoots whether what happened to Khashoggi. Why talk of only USA? Let's remember that just about a week or two ago, we welcomed Mohammad bin Salman in India. At best, one can say that we refuse to accept MBS treating India with a hyphen with Pakistan. So India insisted that we will not receive you if you come from Pakistan. If your tour gets hyphenated as MBS tour of India and Pakistan. Then India registered in a diplomatic fashion, which was right thing to do, and took a stand that we will not receive you if you come from Pakistan. He wants India as customer. Between Saudi Arabia and India, there is a lot of commonality of interest, including it's not a one-way relationship. We want petrol from Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia wants India as a trusted customer. So he went back and then from Riyadh bothered to come over to India again. But we did welcome. There is no mixing of issues. It's protection of national self-interest. When it comes to China, India needs to wake up and get ready for a possibility that no other country may side with India if it comes to India versus China. China has already risen as a world power. We haven't yet. China is skillfully using its everything, soft power, culture, music, Confucius institutes throughout the world, and checkbook diplomacy, backed by a lean and thin but very smart and technologically competent army. So China already has cyber command. Chinese are known for being hackers of world renown. China already has space command, not to speak of nuclear command. Chinese nuclear doctrine is no first use and also no use against an adversary that doesn't have nuclear weapon. That is Chinese nuclear policy. In terms of nuclear weapons, Chinese nuclear policy is indeed no first use and no use against the adversary that doesn't have nuclear weapons. So try to see the picture. In the event of a possible India-China military showdown, both countries have a no first use policy with respect to nuclear weapons. It means it's going to come down to conventional warfare. And when it comes down to conventional warfare, relationship between India and China is almost exactly as the relationship between Pakistan and India. It doesn't give me any pleasure to tell you, but facts are facts. That as Pakistan stands no chance with respect to India in terms of conventional warfare, as of today, mind you, India stands no chance vis-a-vis China should it come down to conventional warfare. And then what we are about to face is more difficult than this one, because there has to be a red line. That okay, India-China military showdown, Is there any red line which, if China crosses, India will begin to consider inevitability of using nuclear power? But then India should remember that once India does it, China also can do it. We are about to face a grim future. When Xi Jinping announced, it was a formal declaration by the person who is manning all three posts, mind you, and the person for whom even constitutional amendment was done. Otherwise, post-Mao, China had maintained a custom. First of all, that custom was laid down by Deng Xiaoping, that no president will remain president for more than 2 tenures. Later on, that was made into a part of the constitution. So every next time the next Chinese premier is to come up, even the world used to know 5 years in advance. So after Deng Xiaoping, if it is Jiang Zemin, then when his first tenure is about to be over, there is a regular Chinese Communist Party session, and the members of Politburo, Political Bureau, that's the highest decision-making body for the party, CCP, Chinese Communist Party. There is a designated next president at the end of the tenure, first tenure of the sitting president. So during Jiang Zemin's tenure, when his first tenure is about to be over, the world knows that the next president will be Hu Jintao. And by 2007, that was when Hu Jintao's first term was about to be over, the world knew that in 2012, Xi Jinping is going to be the president. If that constitutional provision is to be followed, then in 2017 Congress of Chinese Communist Party, that was 20th Congress. It's called the 20th Congress of Chinese Communist Party. Xi Jinping should have declared his successor, his heir, and the China and world should know that after Xi Jinping's tenure comes to an end in 2022, this guy will be the president. But instead of Xi Jinping declaring his heir, what happened was the constitutional amendment making Xi Jinping president for life. The constitution was changed for him, making him the only person and the first person after Mao to man all three posts. Present China is extreme nationalist. It would be misnomer to declare China as a socialist state or globalist or internationalist. China will be best described with the words Middle Kingdom complex. That we are world power number one. Not only that we are world power number, we are the world power. And the whole global view is to be with China at the center. And all remaining powers will have to pay their obeisance to China, and then depending on what kind of obeisance they pay and what is their distance from that Middle Kingdom, our policy will be decided. Another Chinese name for a very important Chinese policy is Wei Qi. I hope I am pronouncing it right because it is spelled as W-E-I, W capital Q-I. This is the policy of deception. The term means lie low until you become so powerful that now enemy cannot take you on. So when Deng Xiaoping got China to adopt capitalist economic policies, he declared all his policies in the term peaceful rise. That is a policy of lying low until you develop your strength. And China finally concluded by 2008 that now we are a world power and we know enough. We know that Chinese belligerence has gone on increasing. So think of South China Sea. And China begins to claim the entire South China Sea, draws what is called as the 9-dot or 9-dash line, begins to claim the territories, and smaller countries in that vicinity prefer to rather bat for China than depend on USA. So the Filipino President Duterte declares that we are close to China. And recently an American military general has already declared that South China Sea is de facto Chinese lake already. He said, short of full-scale war, it's not possible to now dislodge China from its control over South China Sea. So when Xi Jinping asks his military to be ready for war, the world thought that it is probably directed towards USA. But since that day, I have been thinking that we also need to wake up because it may be directed towards India. I must tell you that the global political situation is comparable with what was there in 1962. Here is what I mean when I say that current global situation is comparable to what it was back in 1962. Back in 1962, India was being looked upon as leader of Asia by most of the countries in Asia. By 1962, there was a powerful non-aligned group. Remember, NAM was formally established in 1961. The first summit of non-aligned movement was organized at Belgrade, the capital of Yugoslavia then, in 1961. Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru was a great, considered as a statesman and a titan who strode on international stage. His position was accepted. Back in 1962, Mao and Chou En-lai, Mao's prime minister, were literally considered as international kids in front of Nehru. Marshal Tito for Yugoslavia, Gamal Abdul Nasser for Egypt, Kwame Nkrumah for Ghana, Dr. Sukarno and Suharto for Indonesia. Under the leadership of Nehru, they had all come together to establish non-aligned movement. Even in United Nations, that was the largest single group. Chinese political goal for the 1962 war that happened during October and November of 1962, okay? The political goal was not to conquer any territory. The political goal was to destroy India's position as leader of Asia. In Chinese way of looking at global politics, there is no place for two leaders simultaneously. There is a Chinese proverb also that says that there can be only one tiger in a jungle. There is no place for two tigers in a jungle. And China is clear that we are that power. China is in fact aiming at the upcoming Chinese global order to replace the present global order, which it's an undeniable fact that present global order is US dictated global order. China is seeking to build even parallel institutions, mind you, which will practically nullify the importance of US-led institutions. They are economic institutions, they are banks that AIIB, Asia Infrastructure and Investment Bank. They are undertakings of projects like BRI and One Belt, One Road, CPEC as a kind of offshoot of BRI. When it comes to India, the policy correctly described as string of pearls theory. China seeks to revive the traditional Silk Route and also create another Silk Route that China now describes as Marine Silk Route, So it is across the Pacific coast of China, into Indian Ocean, and across even Indian Peninsula, around India, to dominate even the Indian Ocean. Every single country around India has a Chinese base over there. Every single country is developing closer relationship with China. So Pakistan is China's all-weather friend. Nepal has now a democratic constitution, but the Maoists are sitting in power through the very elections that took place as per democratic constitution. So there is increasing Nepal-China relationship. China, first of all, grabbed Tibet back in 1950, January 1950. India allowed China to grab Tibet. India took a stand that Tibet is an integral part of China. While historically speaking, Tibet has been a sovereign entity between India and China. And if anything, Tibet has always been closer and closest to, in fact, India. Before Chinese grab of Tibet, Indian currency also was acceptable in Tibet. There are all indications that Tibet was a sovereign state. As a part of what came to be called as the 19th century Great Game, British rulers in India wanted to have buffer states around India. So in early 19th century, Afghanistan was looked upon as a buffer state between expanding Romanov, that is Russian power, which is seeking warm water port. That has always been a part of Russian diplomacy. Russia does not have a warm water port. What it means is a port that is operational 24/7 and all 365 days. Russia doesn't have access to any such port. That adversely affects Russia's economy. So one geopolitical compulsion, and therefore the direction of Russian global policy is to look for warm water port. For warm water port, the only direction that Russia can expand in is towards India. And Romanovs had indeed undertaken expansionist policy in 19th century. Then under Napoleon, France was fast becoming the world power. The French showdown was with Britain for who emerges as world power. That was decided in July 1815 when Duke of Wellington defeated Napoleon at Waterloo, the Battle of Waterloo. But until then, Afghanistan was looked upon as a possible and a required buffer state between expanding Russia and France. After France was taken care, and it became clear after 1815 that France cannot anymore compete with Britain for global power. But then China was already considered a power then, and it was seen that China also has probably expansionist designs. So Tibet was seen as a buffer state between even Russia and China. Some other day we will deal with Southeast Asia then and the policy in 19th and 20th century. So Curzon, back in 1905, had sent an official mission to Lhasa to discuss with the Dalai Lama. That was 13th Dalai Lama, and this was young husband mission of 1905. The British offer was to open Tibet for trade and commerce. Dalai Lama rejected that offer. So the British sent in artillery. In the organizational structure of Tibetan state, it's a Buddhist state, and Dalai Lama is the highest head. In Dalai Lama's post, the temporal and spiritual powers unite. But in terms of day-to-day administration, Dalai Lama is supposed to be spiritual guide, while one step below him is Panchen Lama, whose headquarters are at Shigatse, not at Lhasa. Dalai Lama's palace, Potala Palace, is at Lhasa. But Panchen Lama, who is supposed to look after day-to-day administration of the Buddhist state in Tibet, had his headquarters at Shigatse. He would look after day-to-day matters. So the British artillery from India went to Shigatse. And Tibet, of course, did not have any firepower. So that the 13th Dalai Lama had gone to Beijing to seek help. China uses that and many other grounds to argue how Tibet has always been a part of China. That's not true at all. Even objectively speaking, that's not true at all. In fact, there is a time when the same 13th Lama, after he returned to Lhasa, felt threatened with China and was worried that China would swallow Tibet, so he sought British help from India. So a treaty came up between India and Tibet, and that is 1914-15, treaty between India and Tibet. These were the British rulers in India. In fairness, one has to say that China did protest against this treaty. That how come you are entering into a treaty with Tibet, which is our part. China even claimed then. But the British answer was, you have no business. Tibet is an independent sovereign entity and they have every right to decide with who should they enter into treaty relationship. So Chinese objections were rejected. It is under that treaty that the border between Tibet and India was drawn. That border is called McMahon Line, and it is that China doesn't accept. It's important to note that China has kept only McMahon Line with respect to India undecided. If China claimed and continues to claim that even back in 1914-15 Tibet was our integral, how come you accept other McMahon Line and only keep it pending with India? Because diplomats and knowledgeable people do say that China wants to keep that sword hanging on India's head. A possible reason for flashpoint. Non-acceptance of McMahon Line. Then with all so-called sweet talk in international politics, when you look at Chinese actions, they have always been anti-India. They have been detrimental to India's national self-interest. So when Indo-US civil nuclear deal is to be signed finally on 1st of March 2006, that is required to be ratified by the National Nuclear Suppliers Group, which has headquarters in Vienna. NSG came into being after 1974, and that was in response to India conducting its first nuclear test, May 11, 1974. Main goal of NSG is to ensure that the very trade of uranium is controlled. You do that and you are going to control any further proliferation of nuclear technology. Nuclear non-proliferation treaty had already come up back in 1967-68, and while India has always spoken about denuclearized world, disarmament, but India hasn't signed NPT because it is discriminatory. NPT came up with a category called NWS, that is nuclear weapon states. Back in 1968, 6 countries had officially declared that they have nuclear weapons. So they were held as NWS. China was a part of it. China conducted its first nuclear test in 1964. Actually, India was in a position to also conduct it in 1962-64. And Dr. Homi Bhabha was literally pestering Nehru to conduct a nuclear test. But the peaceful country that we are, we didn't conduct. So when NPT happened, China was held as NWS And today India is still struggling to get a formal recognition as NWS. So when NSG came into being, and now there are 47 members, these are the countries which are rich in uranium deposits. For any uranium trade in any two countries or any nuclear deal between any two countries, NSG has to agree, and the principle is NSG has to agree unanimously. It's not majority principle. If even one country objects, then a deal can't go through. So back in 2006, it was only China at the end of the day. Otherwise, Australia, New Zealand, Japan then had opposed Indo-US civil nuclear deal. But one by one they fell in line. Until the last moment, it was only China that opposed. But George Bush had promised that we will get it through NSG. He was able to keep the promise. And now see the contrast. That this time getting Maulvi Azhar Masood declared as international terrorist, US backed it. US used its diplomatic back channel to get China to agree to this one. But this time China chose not to pay any heed. But back in 2006, China also finally fell in line and made India as one-time exception. China was careful to ensure that because Indo-US nuclear deal is seen through at NSG, that India should not get any rights. So the clause is, this is only one-time exception. And even in doing that one-time exception, China insisted on Pakistan being given the same treatment. World community has not accepted that, but China hasn't stopped backing even Pakistan's nuclear program. So the development on which I am choosing to spend time is not a small development. It remains to be seen how India responds. And of course now it's a challenge close on the heels of, as I am saying, Pulwama and Balakot. Actually, the most important point here is that Pakistan is not our enemy number one. China is. That all strategic planning and all our defense and security concerns need to be designed with China at the center, and Pakistan comes as an addendum or kind of a footnote for China. Pakistan derives its strength of even barking at India, not on its own, but because geopolitically it is situated at a place where USA required Pakistan during Cold War phenomenon, and now that it's all changing, now China, another world power, is ready to back Pakistan. India needs to get ready for a possible war on two fronts. As General Shekatkar Sir said yesterday, that no wise power can even contemplate two aggressive wars simultaneously. But defending our national territory, we need to get ready for that. China has backed Pakistan all the time. Even in the Bangladesh Liberation War, China had begun to mobilize army units and bring them onto the front and threaten India. Same in 1965. That India did not take that blackmail at that point of time and went ahead with aggressive designs is to the credit of the leaders and political leaders followed by military leaders at that point. But India is looking at serious dangers. The point is, India's defense and security strategic planning needs to be China-centric. And my closing point is that even today, we do not have a national security doctrine. We need that national security doctrine or national security policy. We don't have it. Our responses are haphazard, to say the least. Something goes wrong on some front and then we respond. But we all the time respond. Actually, not having national security doctrine has a certain serious bearing upon our security issues. That is because the national security doctrine defines the red line. That the world should be told, everyone should be told that this is deal breaker. And in terms of protecting India's national self-interest and India's sovereignty and territorial integrity, following is the red line. And any country does that, then we reserve our right to retaliate any which way we choose. The world should be told about it. Today, the world hasn't been told. In fact, as Shekatkar sir also was saying the other day, along with military strategy, there is also what is very beautifully, correctly called as perception management. There is perception management. And this is all the tactical and strategic moves. Not just responses when some skirmish has happened, but in terms of perception management, that China is belligerent. China has unfinished agenda. That strong China is expansionist and therefore a danger to world peace. While India is a status quoist power, India has no unfinished agenda, and India is not seeking to overturn the existing world order. China is seeking to overturn the existing world order. So like I said, China thwarts India's membership of NSG. As President Bush had promised, the promise was to make India a member of MTCR, Missile Technology Control Regime, and India has become a member. That is because there was nothing China could do to stop India from becoming member of MTCR. But NSG, because again, please try to understand that becoming a member of NSG is a step towards India also becoming a permanent member of United Nations Security Council with veto power. A while ago, US representative in United Nations, Nikki Haley, who is no more the representative, she resigned and looks like she wants to contest the next presidential election. But as official US statement, she had stated that India should agree and be ready to be permanent member of United Nations Security Council, but without veto power. So it's a sudden change in even American policies. We must wake up, I'm saying, we the people, I'm saying we the government, that when it comes to protecting India's national self-interest, nobody else is going to stand up for India. But India is strong enough to stand up on one's own. When it also comes to India and China relationship, rest of the countries in the world will not choose to side. It's possible that they may not choose to side with any one of the two should there be a showdown between the two. And a while ago, the point I've been trying to make clear is 62 conditions are there. That India, as kind of a moral leader of Asia, and Pandit Nehru's leadership as a titan who strides on the global stage, even today's India is increasingly looked upon as a strong country. Prime Minister Modi is looked upon as a strong leader. Those who don't want that to happen, the timing is suitable, mind you. In 1962, the date that China picked up to finally start war was the exact date when both superpowers were at loggerheads with each other and the world had held its breath for a possible Third World War. October 19, 1962. The nuclear hardware-laden 5 cargo ships of Soviet Russia were traveling towards Cuba, where the Cuban leader Fidel Castro had allowed USSR to construct a nuclear base. That would have brought all American cities on the eastern seaboard in the striking distance of USSR's nuclear weapons. As of 1962, most of USSR, especially important cities in USSR, were already within the striking range of America. So USA, because NATO and Western European countries had allowed USA to have nuclear bases in their countries. So Soviet cities were in nuclear shadow. But America, protected by two oceans on both sides, was geopolitically safest. Suddenly that safety was now under question. And President Kennedy had ordered American Navy to fire and fire at will. If USSR Navy crosses a certain line in Atlantic, then President Kennedy had given a standing order to fire. And the world had held its breath. That date is October 19. China invaded India at that Boom La, etc. on October 19, 1962. So my mind makes me say that similar conditions exist today. And if you start thinking of defense and security concerns, I think it's very simple conclusion that China will not take on America right now. China cannot afford to take on America right now. But China can actually weaken American global design by striking at India. India can weaken Chinese design by striking at Pakistan, mind you. So if Pakistan is weakened, if Pakistan agrees to live on India's terms, or if further Pakistan is dismembered, it is less about Pakistan, it is more about controlling, expanding Chinese power. That should Balochistan be really separated from Pakistan, then the whole CPEC is in trouble. Should India take any aggressive action in POK and grab POK, then CPEC is gone. As it is, China knows that forget CPEC, BRI cannot successfully come through unless India backs it. So we are confronting a very problematic situation. In my study, etc., based on some experts, and my study also goes on, it never stops, I would finally close by considering and offering two possible diplomatic options also. So I must tell you that at least one of them comes from Bharat Karnad, who is considered a specialist in defense and security issues, and the other day I had told you two of his books. The first one, Why India is Not a World Power into bracket Yet. That was published in 2015. It's an absolutely extraordinary explanation of India's defense and security concerns. The second one, published just a few weeks ago, Staggering Forward, is his hard and hard-hitting critique of Narendra Modi government. But it is basically focused on security issues. And if I can tell you one-line summary of that book, his one-line summary is that he criticizes Narendra Modi for not standing up to China as much as India should. However debatable, he makes that point very strongly. For example, I'll just share 2 points with you. Bharat Karnad talks of India sharing nuclear technology with Vietnam, and nuclear technology including nuclear missiles, so that on Chinese borders the nuclear missiles are trained to cover all Chinese cities. That should be India's message to China. I'm getting vibes that you people know that I find myself in agreement with this suggestion. Our Act East policy is more about trade and commerce, etc., and a soft power, and the relationship that goes back 2,500 years. But Bharat Karnad suggests that India should do to China what China did to India by bringing North Korea and Pakistan together. The world knows that China is worst proliferator of nuclear weapons and technology. The world knows today. It's not even a secret. It is open today that it is China that got North Korea and Pakistan together and got the two of them to exchange I mean, North Korea gave missile technology to Pakistan in return for Pakistan giving nuclear technology to North Korea. It's a direct threat to world peace. So, Bharat Karnat's suggestion is we should empower Vietnam with nuclear technology, including missiles, so that from Vietnam, the Chinese cities and Chinese vital defense interests are in nuclear shadow. Another of his suggestion, a very critical one, I must tell you, a brilliant one, okay? That we should tell China that we will accept one China policy in return for you accepting one India policy. And you don't do that, then we will also reconsider our one China policy. One China policy is actually a global principle. When Chinese Communist Revolution finally happened decisively by October 1, 1949, USA declared its foreign policy principle of policy of containment and stopping any further spread of communism. So USA refused to confer diplomatic recognition on People's Republic of China. USA took a stand that according to USA, Chiang Kai-shek's Kuomintang government is the official government of China. Chiang Kai-shek ran away to Taiwan and established government in exile for China. From 1945, China was the member of UNSC, mind you. Back in USA took a stand that China is Taiwan. And then when it came to 1971, and USA got intelligence reports that there are differences of opinion so serious that probably USSR and China may actually fight a war with each other, in spite of both being communist countries, that China doesn't accept Soviet leadership of the world communist movement. USA saw a chance that US politics of Sino-American detente unfolded through Pakistan. So Pakistan was USA's again all-weather friend, and geopolitical position helped Pakistan at that point, 1971. It is at that point of time that it was decided between Richard Nixon as the president then and Mao as president of PRC then, that both countries will follow one China policy. China laid down as a part of their national security doctrine that unless that country accepts one China policy, will not enter into any relationship. That's a red line, one China policy. Okay, USA promised it. Both countries know, and the world knows, that the meaning of one China is different for China and for USA. Actually, from Nixon onwards till even Donald Trump, one China means actually it is Taiwan, which is under US protection right now, please remember. And someday, this communist government in China has to go, and it is on that day that Taiwan and mainland China will integrate. That is one China policy. For PRC, it's exactly the other way around. But everyone keeps paying lip service to the concept of one China policy. Bharat Karnat's offer that I appreciate is to tell China that we will accept one China in return for one India policy. So if you continue to harm India's vital interests, then we also reserve all our rights to modify our positions. That would be modifying our position on POK. Even more aggressive than that will be modifying our official position on Tibet, mind you. We should realize that the very act of granting asylum to Dalai Lama, the 14th Dalai Lama, is again a deal breaker for China. China hates this 14th Dalai Lama so much so that even China doesn't recognize that there is any 14th Dalai Lama. And that if you are found to have any relationship with him, you will be sentenced to at least life imprisonment. China just doesn't recognize that. And China remembers, I'm telling you, China won't forget that China continues to claim Arunachal. Till this date, China continues to claim Arunachal as their part. So the offer is India should offer one China policy in return for China accepting one India policy. Pretty tough. So it's like someday declaring that we don't accept Chinese sovereignty over Tibet. It's a big showdown. The history that I understand tells me that at any point of time in history of India, there always have been invaders. While for centuries, most of the invaders came from the northwestern part. And then during last 3 centuries, invaders came from seas. It is for the first time in Indian history, as we understand, that Himalayas are open for invasion now. I must tell you that personally I feel it all the time, that China is sitting on the top and can attack India and disturb India's vital national self-interest at the time of its own choice and whatnot. So it's a tough challenge coming up. It's a long drawn out war. India needs to show that patience and perseverance. I'm worried about so many internal factors, including ideologies and including the nonsense that goes under the misconceived notion of freedom of expression. While I'm an absolute advocate of freedom of expression, the country needs to get ready for a long-term fight. That's where I'll stop today.